Welcome to Clinical Lab Chat, part of the MedCore Podcast Network. I'm Chris Wolski, Director of Business Intelligence for CLP, and today we're going to be taking things in a bit of a different direction from our typical discussions of clinical diagnostics. We're going to talk about how you, that's the laboratory technologists and pathologists, can manage stress and avoid burnout with insights from Brent Franson, founder and CEO of Most Days, an app that uses AI and behavioral psychology to help its members change their habits to improve their mental and physical health. So I think we all know that chronic stress is something that we, and particularly Clinical Lab Chat's audience, all know way too well, and how it's really can be a detriment to our lives and our work. So I don't think anyone will argue with me that one of many of the causes of the ongoing laboratory workforce shortage is technologists leaving the lab due to stress and its end result, burnout. So I'm hoping that Brent can provide some ways that we can manage this stress and can avoid burnout. So Brent, thanks for joining me today, Clinical Lab Chat, and for agreeing to give us some pointers on managing stress and avoiding burnout.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah. All right. So before we get into some of our tips and your pointers here, let's just talk a little bit about stress in and of itself. Now, we always like to think about it these days, particularly because there's so much talk about it, that stress is always a bad thing. But in small doses, it's really good, right? I mean, I had a little stress when I push the record button, I start interviewing someone like yourself. There's a little stress here, but it's the adrenaline. It keeps me up a little bit. But so in small doses, it can be a good thing. So I mean, right? I mean, or disagree with me, of course, but it's a long-term stress. It's being stressed out all the time. That's the big problem, right?
Yeah, and in particular, it's stress without rest. And so
Okay.
so first, let's just define what stress is very simply. So stress is going to be something that is caused by an external factor, right? So you've got
Mm,
stress at work or in a relationship or something that's happening externally.
right.
And then anxiety would be ruminating and worrying. And that rumination and worry continues even in the absence of an external stressor. So
Right.
they can feel very similar, but they are different things. And so stress, in particular, work related stress, yeah, it can be good. There's a little bit of extra energy that might motivate us or push us to do something by a deadline we need to get it done by, or whatever. Stress in and of itself isn't bad. What is bad is relentless stress without rest. And when we experience that over a prolonged period of time, we are going to be at risk for burnout.
Right.
And that's not good for anybody.
Right. So let's talk a little bit very briefly. What are some of those? What does bad stress, this kind of unrelenting stress, do to us both psychologically and physiologically? Because there are physiological effects of stress, right?
Yeah, I mean, so the impact of chronic stress, I mean, you can look at basically any physiological indicator, but increased risk of high blood pressure, heart disease, a whole bunch of different things. It's not good. It's bad for us, and you can
Right.
measure that in about 100 different ways. Um, and so I'm forgetting the second part of your question, but
Psychologically and physiologically, what
yeah.
does this do to us?
Okay, so physical health, toxic, and then psychologically as well. I mean, so what can happen is if you're enduring stress for too long a period of time, you're just going to lose your motivation. You're going to lose your
Right.
connection to the work that you're doing or whatever is happening. Rest is really important. Like my wife and I are watching this F1 show right now, and I'm not a big
Okay.
fan of car racing, but it's very obvious in F1 that you have to pit in order to win the
Right.
race. If you just keep racing, you're going to run out of gas or your tires are going to go bald. It's very obvious that the strategy is you have to pit, you have to basically rest in order to win the race. And I think we lose sight of that in our work really often. So a very important part of combating stress is rest.
Okay, great. Well, this brings me to our next point here. We talked a bit in the pre-interview about that tried and true advice to manage stress. I see these articles all the time. Eat better, sleep more, exercise more, so be active, rest, as you were just saying, eat better, eat vegetables, don't eat just potato chips. Um, but we during the pre-interview, I thought this was really interesting. You called those the little things. And what did you mean by that? And more to the point, why isn't that the magic formula that's going to make stress away? I mean, that's what people talk about all the time. And you said that that can help, but why is it that the little thing and not the big magic bullet?
Yeah. So if stress is caused by some external factor, let's just say stress is caused by your job, and you're having symptoms of stress, you don't feel good, or you're tired, you're not sleeping well, you're less connected to your work. There is a whole bunch of what we would like the little things. Like, so we would, on most days, we would call these habits, but things you do or don't do most days to address those underlying symptoms. And these would be the basics: prioritizing good sleep. And that's both the amount of sleep that you're getting and the quality of sleep that you're getting.
Right.
Prioritizing physical activity, making sure that you're getting, as often as you can, most days, 30 plus minutes of physical activity. Being cognizant of what you're putting into your body, eating healthy foods, limiting alcohol. A big one would be connecting with others and having community. And so those little things really matter in addressing the symptoms of stress. They're not going to address the underlying cause, which I think is important. And also, I think we can kind of beat those recommendations to death a little bit. I think we all know, hey, okay, I understand sleep, diet, and exercise are important, but there's a lot going on at work right now. And then I don't know, my kids have been struggling a little bit. And like, I just don't have time for these things. Like, I'm aware I don't need to hear it again. So it's a good reminder. They really do matter. And if you
Right.
want a super habit, it is to go for a walk or a hike outside with a friend. The science is really clear around spending time outside, vitamin D from the sun. The
Right.
science is really clear on physical activity, and the science is really clear on connecting with somebody else. So that stuff really matters, but I think we're all mostly aware of it. And then again, it doesn't address the cause of the stress; it addresses the underlying symptoms.
Right. Right. Now you talked about, again, the pre-interview. You talked about there's the big thing, the big stuff, or the big things that we can do. Let's talk. So I think that's where we really need to talk about, because you're right. We're all aware of this. We all know that we need to exercise more and eat vegetables and sleep 8 hours a day, and not be obsessed with our phones, and have our friends, and have those connections. What's the big stuff? Let's talk about what are those big things that people like our audience who are in high stress jobs, what can they do to manage stress more effectively, to address maybe those underlying things, and then just use those little things, those good things, and sprinkle those on to make sure that we're staying on that good de-stress baseline.
Yeah, and those little habits, they matter, like, no matter what. Like, if you're doing really well and you're low stress,
Yeah.
it's you still, sleep, diet, exercise matter, and they matter if you're stressed. So, okay, so
Yeah.
the big things. I don't think we talk about these things enough, because it can be awkward to talk about them, and there can be some risk in discussing them. So everybody's got to figure out what's best for them. You don't want to
Right.
blindly take my advice or anybody else's.
Right.
But what
Sure.
are the big things? What are the things that really matter? And the example I would use here as a big thing is like, if you are this is an extreme example. If you're in an abusive relationship, you're not going to be able to like sleep, diet, and exercise your way out of that. You have to deal
Right.
with the relationship itself. And so that's just a very extreme example. But the big things are, what do you do for work and where do you work? So maybe you're in the wrong job, or maybe you work for the wrong company. Like, you need to be really honest with yourself about whether or not you are doing the right work. And then there's a layer below that, which is like, if you're going to stay at the company you're at, you're going to stay in the role that you're in, what can you do to change that role? If you feel like work is what's related to your stress. I spoke with an expert on that helps people figure out how to get jobs. And he said the number one mistake that people make is they look at salary and they look at title, and they don't spend enough time prior to taking a job at looking at like, what is it like to work on like that specific team? Like, how does that manager manage the team? What do other people on the team say about like what it's like to work there? And thinking through like the fit of, is basically like the team and person fit. So
Right.
one of the big things is like, you got to look critically at your job, and maybe you should quit your job. Maybe you should work for a different company. Maybe you should try to work for a different manager. Like maybe there's a big change that needs to
Yeah.
be made there. Number two on the big things would be like, who are you in relationship with? And so maybe you're not in a relationship and like spending more time, finding a good relationship would be helpful for you. Maybe you should get a divorce, or break up with whoever your partner is. Maybe you need to like do some real work on the relationship and like get a couples therapist or whatever. But where we work really matters. And then who we're in relationship, particularly like our kind of closest, like romantic partner, that really matters. And maybe the stress is emanating from the relationship and we need to take a hard look at the relationship. The third category on the big things is like, where do you live? And so this can be like, what state do you live in? Like, do you live in the right place? What city in this? If you're in the right state, do you live in the right city? If you're in the right city, do you live in the right home? Like our home really matters. And it can be hard to face these things head on because it's scary. That kind of change is
Right.
really scary. But sometimes you need to sell your house and like move somewhere else, or sometimes you need to, rent a different place, move to a different part of town, or move yourself across the country. Those things really matter. And then, so where we work, who we're in relationship with, where we live, these can be sources of stress. And sometimes we need pretty major changes to these things. And we want to be really honest with ourselves about that. And then there are some bigger things that you can do that aren't changes like that, but I'll just pause there.
Okay. Okay, great. So, and I am not advocating that people should quit their jobs. So, but I think that what you're saying here is you really need to take a hard look at where you are, basically.
Yeah, I'm not advocating that anybody quit or not quit their jobs. I mean, I
Yeah,
think everybody's got to figure that out for themselves. What I am saying is first, if you're feeling really stressed out, you got to think about what is the source of that stress.
right,
And then once
right,
you identify the source, I would, I do this myself. I encourage myself to be really honest, no matter how scary it is, about like, hey, what needs to change in order for that not to be such a source of stress? Right. And again, back to
right.
that extreme relationship. It's like, oh, well, my stress is coming from my relationship. And actually the person I'm with is like, they're like really verbally abusive. It's like, well,
Yeah,
then maybe you need to change that. And I'm not, I use that just as a hyperbolic example,
right.
but
Sure, sure.
you need to be really honest with yourself about, and even if that means, and even if it's just a thought exercise of thinking through like, oh, what if I moved to Paris? It's like, maybe you never moved to Paris, but thinking through, like asking the hard questions, we only live once, life is short, and really asking yourself, like, what would it take to really adequately address the source of stress? And maybe there's nothing you can do. Like, I've got young kids, it just is what it is. There's no addressing the
Yeah,
source
sure.
of that. It's, you just kind of grind your way through it.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be afraid of asking yourself the hard questions. There's a lot of learning there.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is what happens, because everybody says, "Oh, I'll just," they look at the little stuff. "Oh, I'll just sleep my way out of this, or I'll exercise my way out of this," and not really looking at that in the right way. I think that's really what you're saying is that you have to really dig in there and look at that. I know for myself, I've been in those situations. I've been in the situations where I've had jobs way in the past, and I literally had that moment. What am I doing here? And that led me to, and it was scary. I ended up moving across the country, etc. As a result, and I know how that was stressful in its own way, but in a good way. That was exciting. You got that adrenaline kick. That new things. So CLP's primary audience are laboratorians and pathologists, and their jobs are stressful. Will likely always be stressful. It's there's life and death decisions that they have to make, and they have to make the right calls every day. So, how can people, say, in high stress, life and death professions, manage stress and avoid burnout? They're not going to, maybe they'll get a different job, and maybe they're in a situation where it's not exactly the right kind of environment for them. They want to be in a different environment, want to live in a different place. No matter what the context is, there's going to be that high stress perspective on that. So how do you do that? Do you find ways to separate that out? I mean, do you how would you advise someone to handle that?
Yeah, so you're in a high stress job that has high
And,
stakes, and
and
like
you
that
always
starts
will
to
be.
change. Yep,
Yeah.
and you always will be. And so, look, I think this is where a couple of things are important, particularly this is more important in midlife than I think it is like right at the very beginning of your career,
Right.
which are rest and novelty. And so
Mm,
on the rest side, consider things like digital Sabbath, which is very literally like your phone goes into a drawer on Saturday morning and you don't pull it out until Sunday morning. If you need to be in touch, you can get a like a flip phone that just basically
right.
it's you've got a phone number, they're very inexpensive, et cetera. But you want to find time to be offline. The second piece I would recommend that's important is novelty. There can be this in midlife. There can be this feeling of Groundhog Day. It's like, okay, I'm getting
Right.
up, I'm doing my work, I'm going home, kind of doing the same things on the evening, I'm doing the same things on the weekend, and you want to find moments to break yourself free of that. I just had one
Hmm.
of these, so I've got 3 young kids, and my job is hard, and I'm very stressed out, and I I live in Boulder, Colorado, but I had a trip planned to Portland to see I go see an away basketball game with
Oh,
my
nice.
brother every year, and he canceled at the last minute. And I'm like, it's kind of rainy in Portland, and it's a little bit different. But I still went. I said, hey, I think I need this. And 48 hours of just being in a new place. They've got a big bookstore there. I went and I loved
Powell's is the best.
Powell's amazing. They've got, I love my morning latte, and I was
Yep.
finding like local latte spots and walking around. I went for a long run. I'm a runner in a place I had never run. So it's a lot of the stuff that I would have done in Boulder. I would have gotten my latte at my local spot. I would have gone on a run on a Saturday, but I was in a totally new place, and it's very rejuvenating, and it's
Yeah.
hard to see it on the other side. I'm like, I don't know, a weekend in Portland, I got to go to the airport, but novelty and kind of a variety of experience is really helpful for putting some energy back into the tank. And so I would highly recommend the Digital Sabbath, or the, like, I don't know, what's a place that's like an hour and a half plane ride away that you haven't been. It's not going to be too expensive for the weekend. You go, and whatever you like to do, whatever your version of like coffee you like, or, going for the run, find that in the new place,
Right.
and you'd be surprised at how helpful that is. Rest and novelty are really important.
Yeah, that's great advice. I have had some uh, trips. Actually, I was in Portland not too long ago, so I know of what you speak. And I did do some of those kinds of things where it's just that perspective change. We got out in nature a little bit. We got rained on. We went to Powell's. It was fantastic, and it does to help reset things a little bit. Come back a little
Yeah.
fresher. Yeah.
And there's this element of like, don't overthink it. It's
Right.
so easy to be like, I can't really do it this weekend, or where do we want to go? It's like, just book it and go. Like, it's going to
Right.
be fine. You're going to get in your own way if you overanalyze. Look at the calendar 3 weeks out, 4 weeks out, pick a location, book it, make sure you got a hotel, and like go, and you're not going to regret it. It's a nice little weekend. You're getting out and you're seeing something new.
Yeah, I think it's great advice. So, talking about advice, now we've talked about a lot of different things, the little stuff, big stuff, novelty, etc. If you had one piece of advice, people listening today and said, "Hey, I am ready to get de-stressed," uh, what would you say? What would be the one thing you say? So we're recording this on a Friday afternoon, and if someone's listening to this and they're going to the weekend, uh, what would you say? Okay, Saturday morning, this is the first thing you need to do to help you de-stress.
Oh, I don't know. That's so specific to the individual. I mean, the let me think about this. I'll share what that is for myself personally. So it would be it would be being offline, first of all. So I would really put away devices and screens. And then for me personally, I would be in nature. I love to trail run, and I
Okay.
follow the trail run with time in a sauna. Now I've put a sauna in my home. I'm a big fan of sweating and sitting in a sauna, but you can find your local Y. You can go to the local place. You might get a massage or something. And so I think the number one thing you can do to address the symptoms is physical activity outside. And then if you can, I mean, this is just a personal favorite of mine, follow it with sitting in a sauna and like really intensely sweating. And you're going to come out of that. Like I'm somebody who, if I let all of my vices just take me over, I would like take Xanax all the time. I really like Xanax. Now I don't take it, it's not, I
Right.
can't take it. It's addictive, but it's
Right.
like, for me, it's hard for me to relax and it makes me feel good. So the only way for me to really replicate that is a good workout and then sitting in the sauna. So little things like that. It's not going to address the underlying cause, as we've talked about,
Right.
but you will feel better after a long hike or a trail run or a walk with a friend outside and then sitting in the sauna.
Yeah. And with something like that too, I know for myself, I've done my version of that. It also helps you to kind of recalibrate a little bit and say, okay, I am ready to look at whatever that. Do I like where I live? Do I like who I'm with? Do I like where I work? And I've had those situations where it's almost like you get you're able to, you feel like you can breathe a little bit, and then you can really take a look at those big questions that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I think this is true for so many people, is the person you are when you like exercise specifically, like when you leave for the hike or the run or whatever it is not the person who comes back. So for me, I'm like, I don't feel like doing it. I don't
Yeah.
want, I'm kind of dragging through the day. And then you go from that anaerobic state, and about 10 minutes into whatever it is, you're in an aerobic state and you're starting to get this neurochemical feedback that feels really good. And you just come back a different version of yourself. And so,
Yeah.
and I totally agree with you. The version of yourself kind of after the exercise and getting outdoors is much better suited to think through
Yeah.
some of these thorny questions.
Yeah.
So yeah, never mistake like who you are before you're going to do something like that. You kind of come back transformed in a short period of time.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I've been there. I've done that too. So that is very true. That you start, "Ugh, I don't want to do this," and then you come back and say, "I'm so glad I did that. Now I'm ready to tackle whatever that problem is." Sometimes it's something very specific. Sometimes it's a big question like we're talking about today. So unfortunately, with that, we've come to the end of our time. So, Brent, thanks so much for sharing your insights here. I think you provided us with some great tools and some strategies to help manage stress and avoid burnout. I don't think we answered all the questions, but I think we can help maybe get people started on that journey. I also want to thank you, the laboratory audience, for listening. Look for more episodes of Clinical Lab Chat in the future, and visit us online at clpmag.com and on all of the major social media platforms. And until next time, be well.
Thanks, Chris.